homes. For the first time ever, we're having problems with dampness and mould in our properties, and it's because of the rising energy costs. It's outrageous. What is he going to do about that? Is he connecting the dots at all?
Thank you so much. And we're going to be coming to yourself in the next hour. Thank you very much, Hilary. But I believe we've got to go back to yourself now, Camilla. So it will be interesting to see what your guests have to say about those questions today.
Great questions. Thank you very much indeed, Sophie. And don't forget, tomorrow, it's a big moment for GB News because we're going to have the People's Forum at 8 p.m. with the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, so you won't want to miss that. Don't go anywhere because in just a few minutes I'm going to be speaking to the former Chancellor, Kwasi Kwarteng, and getting grips to why he announced this week that he's stepping down as an MP.
Hi, Rishi here. As Prime Minister, I'm focused on delivering on your priorities. So I'll be on the road to join GB News for a special People's Forum on Monday the 12th of February, where I'll be taking questions from a live audience about the issues that really matter to you: the economy, immigration, the NHS. See you there.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Britain's Newsroom, weekday mornings from 9:30.
The EU rules are trying to choke even that. And I just think, you know, I would join this protest in a heartbeat. And you are right to point out this stuff about them being right-wing. How dare they slate them as right-wing when these are real people whose livelihoods are
remember,
being
a lot of
trashed.
people who work in the farm industry, Malone, get paid very little money.
They get paid.
Agricultural workers are very badly paid.
They get paid nothing, Pierce. And, you know, the profits... I think on Clark's Farm I read somewhere that I saw that when you sell it like a sheep's skin, it's 30 pence or something. Right. And you say, what?
Yeah.
And so you wonder how they can manage that. And I think after a year, Clarkson made a handful of pounds.
He made like 90 quid profit or something.
In a whole year working.
But Carol makes a really good point, though, doesn't she, Nikki, about this idea that we go to the supermarkets, we shop there, we eat our food, we don't often give it a thing. And the farmers have become so frustrated by this idea that they are not respected.
Absolutely. I mean, they're running what are effectively small businesses, often family businesses that have been passed down through generations. They also tend to know the land and the animals better than anyone else in those areas. You know, I'm all for green protests, you know, I'm all for climate change activism, but actually... the only way you can do that is gradually. It's exactly what we've seen with Port Talbot. You know, you can't just go in and say you're not going to do it anymore this way. You've got to do it this way instead. The Tata Steel thing. Yes, exactly. You've got to do it this way instead. You know, lots of farmers are on board with protecting the planet, but they can't do it overnight. You've got to give them time. So they're protesting. You know, they're saying no farmers, no food.
When
well,
you say
can't
you
get any more
support
obvious.
some of these environmental protests, you're not one of these closet supporters of Just Stop Oil, are you?
I'm not a closet supporter. I think I've been quite open about Just Stop Oil.
No.
I don't like all their methods, but I do like the message. But I do appreciate the message. Yeah, but sometimes you've got to do difficult things.
What they're asking for now, those protesters, are unrealistic. What these protesters are asking for is not unrealistic.
No.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Welcome back. Former Chancellor of the Exchequer, Kwasi Kwarteng, MP for Spelthorne, joins me now. Kwasi, lovely to see you this morning.
Good to see you.
So why are you standing down?
Well, I just thought after 14 years, it's quite a long time, and it's probably time to move on. And I think that happens in lots of people's lives.
Why now? I mean, it doesn't show that much confidence in the Tories, does it?
Not at all. It's a personal decision. And actually, many years ago, I remember writing a book where I thought we should have term limits for MPs, because I think people the danger is that not that they leave too soon, but people stay on a bit too long.
Was it the case that the reaction to the mini-budget and everything that subsequently happened was so bruising?
Not really.
Has that had an impact? Because last year you wouldn't be saying that you were going to stand down this year.
Well, I've been thinking about it for a long time.
Have you? How long?
And there was, well, ever since the beginning of the Parliament, actually. I had thought, and I was Minister of State at that point, I had thought that, 3 terms, obviously we had more elections, but 15 years is probably, in this modern climate, a reasonable amount of time to be an MP. So a lot of the thinking about that was frankly, germinating in my mind before.
But you're now one of 56 Tories to say they're standing down. I mean, your majority is what, about 18,000?
Yeah, I'm confident I would have held the seat.
Really?
Yes, I am. I wouldn't be somebody who would have thought that I would lose.
But why are so many MPs jumping ship?
Well, they have lots of reasons. I mean, for a start, I think the fact that we're facing a difficult election has something to do with it. You've got to be honest about that. But the climate of being an MP, a lot of people are finding that difficult as well. It's a huge, stress on family life. I hate to say it, but I've never felt under any physical threat whatsoever. No. But I think a lot of colleagues, frankly, have.
Did you get a lot of abuse after the mini-budget?
Not really. I mean, 1 or 2 comments here and there. And I always use the public, people who know me knew I always use public transport.
Yeah, I know. You're always out and about.
Yeah, I'm always
visible.
out and about. That's right. So I took that decision. And actually, for the first month or 2, the odd comment. And then that dies down. I think most people are very respectful.
There's a story on the front of The Observer today saying the Tories have given up on the general election. So I'm wondering, presumably Rishi Sunak phoned you, begged you to stay on?
No, not at all. I didn't hear anything from him. But
really?
I wouldn't expect that.
Hang on, what, the Prime Minister didn't phone and say, you're a former Chancellor?
No. I mean, he's busy, isn't he? He's doing his work. He's trying to
But is he not phoning these MPs and saying, no, please, stick the 5-point plan?
So I'm not sure that their outreach plan is necessarily working very effectively.
Explain that to me.
Well, I just don't think, that they've got the bandwidth to keep communicating with people in the way that they should. But of course,
Do you mean with MPs or the public?
Well, with MPs. I mean, you could see that with people like Robert Jenrick leaving the government. I mean, I don't know what conversations they had. But we've got to be honest and say, some of these personal, relationships probably need to be worked on.
Is he not good at fostering good relations with his MPs? I mean, we had Cameron, didn't we, back in the day, sort of doing canapes and sandwiches every 5 minutes.
I think it's always a challenge. And to be fair to Number 10, I have been invited to things, lots of things, actually. There are lots of events.
I know, but it is intriguing that the Prime Minister wouldn't contact...
No, I didn't.
I mean, he was a Chancellor.
So, to be fair to him, the day I was sacked as Chancellor, he did call me and we had a very good conversation, and I see him occasionally.
What did he say when he called you when you were sacked?
Well, I mean, he just said, he commiserated, and he was a colleague, and he's somebody that I regard him as a friend. I mean, when he came into Parliament, he was clearly one of the very able people that had come in that election, among many. And I struck up a friendship with him. I thought he was a really good and capable MP, backbench MP, and then Minister. But
then, are you disappointed with his performance as both Chancellor and indeed Prime Minister? I was intrigued to find out this week that the Treasury is now briefing smaller tax cuts, when only 5 minutes ago, Jeremy Hunt's sort of saying that he wants to channel his inner Nigel Lawson.
So look, to be fair to Rishi, and I was responsible for this partly, he came in under massive pressure, and the markets were going crazy. He had to stabilise the situation. Jeremy Hunt, if you recall, was actually appointed by Liz Truss. I always point this out. People always think...
Do we think Rishi Sunak really want to have Jeremy?
Well, I don't know about that, but it's unusual, and I've said this before. Yeah. It's unusual for a new Prime Minister not to bring in their own Chancellor of the Exchequer. That's rare, as a matter of fact.
Yes.
And I think he was under a lot of pressure. And the situation that he found himself in was highly charged and difficult. And what he did, I think he did very well. He stabilised things. He was calm. He took a measured approach. He always said that would only be the first stage. It was necessary but not sufficient to win, to calm things down. In order to win, you had to have a platform and a programme that is attractive to a majority or a large number of people. And that's something that I'm afraid I think we're still working on. If you look at the polls, I mean, it's interesting to me that the polling situation now isn't that different from what it was at the end of 2022.
Yes. He's not really moved the dial at all.
Well, I don't think he has.
So what should he do?
So I've written about this, and I'm very keen that this should happen. I don't think there's any chance of us getting back in to government simply just by more steady she goes.
No.
I think there's got to be something. There's got to be something that's attractive to
Boldness,
voters.
rather than caution.
A little bit. I mean, in a way, if the criticism against what Liz and I were trying to do was that it was too much too fast, I think the danger is that you overcorrect and do not very much, very slowly, as it were.
Yes.
And I think there has to be a middle way.
Well, give me some examples, like the budget, for instance, seems to be this kind of, everything's resting on the budget. If he doesn't pull a rabbit out of the hat on March the 6th.
I think there has to be some attractive offer.
What should the rabbit look like?
Look at broadly at the Conservative Party, all through my life. Two of the principal things that Conservatives should be fighting for are lower taxes and secure borders, strong on immigration and strong on taxes.
Well,
and
would you like to see an immigration cap?
Yes, I mean, there's got to be something on it. I mean, on two of those metrics, we haven't, frankly, performed very well.
No.
And I've been involved with that. Other people have been responsible for that.
If you were going to cap immigration, what would you put it at? It's currently at 745,000.
So just as a matter of fact, when I stood in 2010, our policy was tens of thousands. That's what David Cameron said. And if 14 years later you've got 745,000, that's a problem. You've clearly not done what you said you were going to do.
What should they say, 200,000?
I think they should. I think they've got to work towards a cap.
Yeah.
And they've got to try and be convincing about it.
And on taxes, IHT, income tax, NIs, what would you look at bringing
So
down?
we did NIs, and if you remember, Liz Truss campaigned on reversing the NI tax increase, which we successfully did. And the other thing that she campaigned on was not increasing corporation tax. Now, I think my problem, was that we brought in too many other things in the mini budget. If we just stuck to those two things and shown some restraint on saving at the same time, I don't think any of the
But tell me one tax
happened.
that you think Jeremy Hunt should reduce in March.
Well, I would say, looking at where we are with corporation tax, I don't think that should increase. And I also think thresholds for inheritance tax should be increased.
Right.
Because simply there's a lot of drag in that. Okay. And clearly a lot of people, particularly in the southeast, particularly Tory areas, are having to pay inheritance tax on properties that their parents might have spent all their lives working
Although
for.
there's another argument that it doesn't actually affect that many people, inheritance tax.
I think it's
people have a perception it will affect them, but it doesn't.
That's right, it doesn't. But the people it does affect, it affects quite seriously.
How about the freezing of tax rate bands? Should they be unfrozen? I mean, fiscal drag's a massive problem.
It's a huge problem, and the reason why it's there is because the OBR obviously scores things and says, well, look, you can't, the economy isn't growing. That's the fundamental problem. And in order to raise tax revenue, it's easy to do it in a stealth tax way and simply just freezing the bands.
Should they be unfrozen?
And I think you've got to look at that. I mean, if you look at the way in which the 40% rate was introduced all those years ago, that was a top rate of tax. People who are paying 40% were a very small proportion of wage earners. Today, so many people are brought into that tax bracket. And clearly, if inflation's running very high and you stick to those tax bands, that level, more and more people are going to pay more tax.
What do you make of reports that the Tories should bring back Boris?
Well, I think, in a way, and I've always been a big Boris fan because I've seen him campaign so many times so effectively. I mean, he won the mayoralty twice, he won Brexit, he won the Tory leadership, he won that general election. And people could say there were lots of other factors, of course there were, but he had a very good success as an electoral force. And I think saying, he should come back is a sign that, things are very difficult.
But do you think Rishi should call him? That's the suggestion in the Sunday Telegraph, that Johnson's waiting for a phone call. Because you said that he's not very good at reaching out to him.
My view is, if you want somebody's help, you should reach out to them.
Yes.
That's what you would do.
Yes.
If you were in a difficult spot and you wanted a friend to help you or somebody to help you, you would probably pick up the phone.
Well, he might not want to admit that he needs the help from his former nemesis.
There's all of that ego and nonsense. But you have to be realistic. We're 20 points behind and the polls haven't really moved in the last year.
Yeah.
So it's not time simply to more of the same.
No.
Something has to change for us to have a chance of winning. And if that means swallowing some pride and suppressing a bit of ego and reaching out to someone who's an approved campaigner, then he should do that.
All right. Thank you very much indeed, Kwasi Kwarteng, for joining us this morning. Lovely to speak to you. Lots more to come on today's show. I'm going to be joined by Michael Gove, the Levelling Up and Housing Secretary. I'll also be speaking to the Shadow Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, Pat McFadden. You won't want to miss it, so don't go anywhere. See you very soon.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. Weekdays from midday.
Chris, what is the preferred way in which the police go about their business at the moment? There's these two strands of thinking. Evidence-based policing versus bobbies on the beat.
It's very, very difficult. The problem that police have got, basically, is that they're too thinly spread, and it's too much is expected of them. There's a long list, isn't it? Every month we hear police need to do more about this, police need to do more about that, and police do their best. They're overwhelmed with bureaucracy. I mean, when I was a young PC, if I took a shoplifter in, then I'd be in and out within an hour. You take a shoplifter in now, and you're doomed for the rest of your shift for 6 or 7 hours dealing with the bureaucracy. Police want to get back in those communities because community policing is really the core of policing. But such are the demands on their time at the moment, and the bureaucracy, and the fact that they are struggling now to retain experienced officers. People are hemorrhaging out of the police, and new recruits coming in haven't got that experience, and there's a good chance they may not stay anyway. So there's all sorts of problems. And for the Home Secretary to glibly say he wants more done, frankly, clearly shows he's got no understanding of the pressure police are under, and of course the constant criticism that they face across the board. Very rarely do you actually hear of police officers getting praised for acts of bravery or acts of compassion. So there's a problem with morale in the police force, and clearly a problem with the Home Secretary, who needs to get out there and talk to officers on the front line who frankly are struggling. And last night, of course, was a graphic example.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. So much more to come in the next hour. We've got Levelling Up Secretary Michael Gove and Pat McFadden, the man managing Labour's election campaign. But first, here's the news with Tatiana Sanchez.
Camilla, thank you. Your top stories from the GB Newsroom. The Foreign Secretary says he's deeply concerned about the prospect of a planned Israeli ground invasion of the southern Gaza city of Rafah. Lord Cameron said on his X account the priority must be an immediate pause in the fighting and progress towards a permanent ceasefire. Yesterday, at least 44 Palestinians, including more than a dozen children, were killed by Israeli airstrikes in Rafah. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu signalled there would be an imminent invasion, saying he'd asked his military to prepare to evacuate hundreds of thousands of civilians. His aim, he says, defeating Hamas. The Defence Secretary is said to be furious as he orders a review of the Ministry of Defence's diversity and inclusivity policy. It comes as it's been reported in today's Telegraph that the Army wants to relax security clearance vetting for overseas recruits to boost diversity and inclusion. Grant Shapps told the Sunday Telegraph that he's ready to go to battle over the matter. He's warned that there will be no lowering of security clearance requirements on his watch. According to the paper, the UK's armed forces are looking overseas because they've reportedly failed to hit recruitment targets. Fujitsu is set to have received more than £3.4 billion through contracts from Treasury-linked organisations since 2019, despite its role in the Post Office scandal. The Commons Treasury Committee says Fujitsu was awarded around £1.4 billion worth of deals since a 2019 High Court ruling concluding there'd be numerous failings in its Horizon IT system. £2 billion worth of contracts were also agreed before 2019 and remained active thereafter. A group of MPs wrote to organisations, including HMRC, the Financial Conduct Authority and the Bank of England, to demand details of their agreements with Fujitsu. The committee said all three have spent considerable sums with them. And the King has shared his heartfelt thanks for the overwhelming public support he's received in his first message to the public since being diagnosed with cancer. His Majesty said such kind thoughts are greatest comfort and encouragement to him. News of the diagnosis was announced by Buckingham Palace on Monday, that he's facing a form of cancer unrelated to his recent prostate treatment. The King says sharing his own diagnosis has helped promote public understanding and shine a light on the work of many organisations supporting cancer patients and their families across the UK and the wider world. For the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now it's back to Camilla.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. Still lots more to come. In just a minute, I'm going to be joined by the Shadow Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, Pat McFadden. I'll be asking him whether Labour has scored an own goal with its U-turn on green jobs. I'll be asking Michael Gove, Levelling Up Secretary, why he's reportedly fallen out with his former protégé, Kemi Badenoch. I'll also be joined by Sir Simon Mail, the former Deputy of the Chief of the Defence Staff, who will tell us whether he thinks Joe Biden is fit to be US President. Queen Elizabeth II's former Press Secretary, Elsa Anderson, will also join me to discuss all things royal following the King's cancer diagnosis. And we'll get the verdict live from our People's Panel in Manchester. But first of all, I'm joined by Shadow Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, Pat McFadden, the Labour MP for Wolverhampton South East. Mr McFadden, lovely to see you this morning. The U-turn on the Green Prosperity Plan comes after a great deal of flip-flopping. I mean, I could go through the list, but we've had all sorts of U-turns from Sir Keir Starmer. Is he indecisive? Incompetent? Why can't he stick to Labour's plan, Mr McFadden?
Well, we announced this plan 2.5 years ago at a time when interest rates were only 0.1%, basically zero. They're now 5.25%. And any of your viewers who've had to remortgage in the last year or so will know that that makes a huge difference to the cost of borrowing, and for the country, it means that the cost of borrowing is now £70 billion a year higher than when the plan was first announced. And as you approach the election, as you're writing your manifesto, we're going to have an election this year, it's really important to look at everything you've said in the past few years and ask yourself the question, does that fit with the economic circumstances of today or the ones 2.5 years ago?
But he's flip-flopped on so much, hasn't he? I mean, we've got flip-flopping on nationalising utilities, outsourcing in the NHS, flip-flopping on the support of trade unions, free movement, abolishing universal credit, supporting Jeremy Corbyn, then not supporting Jeremy Corbyn, abolishing tuition fees, universal childcare, rent controls, the ULEZ expansion. I mean, it's too many to mention. So the only conclusion that GB News viewers and listeners can draw is that he simply doesn't have a plan, or at least not one he can stick to.
Oh, I think you're reading out the Tory talking points there about not having a plan.
It was actually in Politico, this list.
Even after the change that we announced a few days ago, we're still going to have GB Energy, a publicly owned energy firm that will help drive the transition to clean power. We're still going to have a national wealth fund to invest in things like making sure the country's got a steel industry in the future. We're going to have investment in our ports. We're going to have a plan to insulate more homes. We're going to have local power plans. There's still a lot in this plan that will create jobs, give us more energy security and be a good plan for the country. I'm sorry I'm having a bit of earpiece problems here, but I'll do my best.
Mr McFadden, hopefully you can still hear me. Let me ask you about the Labour candidate in Rochdale, Azhar Ali. Now, he's had to apologise for making, I would say, some extremely extremely offensive remarks. He said that Israel let its people be killed so it could invade Gaza. He's a Labour candidate in Rochdale. You can't make comments like that and expect to run for office, can you? He shouldn't be a Labour candidate, should he?
Look, his comments were completely wrong, and they don't represent Labour's views, don't represent my views, Keir Starmer's views. He has apologised and retracted. I think it's right that he does so. I hope he learns from this, and those views were completely wrong, and he should never have said something like that.
Is it appropriate that he's still a candidate if his views are that wrong? I appreciate an apology, but what else does this man believe? There's also a piece in the Jewish Chronicle this morning suggesting that he has given funding to an extremist mosque.
Well, I haven't seen that report, but he's completely apologised for those remarks, and as I said, it's quite right that he does so, because they were completely wrong. He's retracted them, and it's right that he does that too.
Can I ask you a question about Tony Blair, who I knew you once worked very closely with, Mr McFadden? There's a suggestion in the Sunday Times today that he's heavily involved in Labour's operation. Just how involved is Tony Blair?
Well, I'm not aware that he is. I mean, I think he spends a lot of time in the Middle East these days. So I don't know that that's true. I read all sorts of reports about who's involved in what and who's up and who's down, and I don't recognise most of them, to be honest. What we are doing is getting on with the job. We've got an election coming up. We want to make sure that our manifesto is fit and ready. If we have to make some changes to things that we've said to make that the case, we'll do that. That's an exercise of leadership. It's a sign of strength that we do that. And when we go to the people, whenever the Prime Minister's got the courage to actually call an election, we want a manifesto that gives people hope and that everything in it can be delivered. And that's what we're going to do.
What kind of Prime Minister will Keir Starmer be? Because I'm a bit confused. Is he a Corbynista, having supported Jeremy Corbyn for all those years, or is he actually a Blairite? Because there seems to be confusion in the party as well. We've got on one hand people saying that he's not left-wing enough, on the other that he's too right-wing. Who is this guy, Mr McFadden?
He's his own man is the answer, Camilla. I've got to push back a wee bit on your stuff about U-turns. This Prime Minister we've got is a walking, living U-turn. He's only there because the Tories had to U-turn on a disastrous budget. It's the only reason he's Prime Minister. They didn't even vote for him. He's the personification of U-turn.
Well, let's talk about another U-turn. Abolishing the House of Lords was something that Sir Keir Starmer announced some years ago. Apparently you don't want to do that anymore. Maybe you just want to limit the number of hereditary peers. So that's a major U-turn, isn't it, for Labour?
Well, look, let's see what the manifesto has got to say about that.
Are you going to abolish the House of Lords then?
But we haven't published our manifesto, and when the Prime Minister eventually works up the courage to stop hiding from the election that's got to come, we'll publish our manifesto, and there'll be definitely something about the House of Lords in that.
But would you like to see the House of Lords abolished, Mr McFadden? What's your personal opinion?
I'm really sorry about the earpiece.
Don't worry, you're looking great.
The House of Lords is indefensible in its current form. It has to be changed, and we'll set out the plans for doing that in our manifesto when the Prime Minister eventually calls an election.
Final question, Mr McFadden, and thank you for bearing with that earpiece. I've been in that position myself where the earpiece has come out. Do you think it was a mistake for Keir Starmer to politicise the tragic murder of Brianna Ghey? I mean, he wasn't meant to refer to somebody in the gallery. It's clearly stipulated in Erskine May that that's a no-no. Why did he do that?
No. I don't think your summary of that is right. I don't think that's what Keir Starmer did. I think the big lesson from that Prime Minister's questions exchange last week is that when the Prime Minister throws a shot like that across the dispatch box, you've got to remember this debate has real people and real lives at the heart of it, and I think that is the big lesson from last week.
OK. Pat McFadden, thank you for bearing with your earpiece and for us this morning. It's been really great to speak to you. Thank you very much. OK, take care.
Thank you.
Do not move a muscle, because in just a minute Sir Simon Mail will be joining me, and I'll be grilling Michael Gove on the government's failure to meet its own housing targets. Stay tuned.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Lee Anderson's Real World, Fridays from 7 p.m.
Dr. Jane Jones, who's the clinical lead for Care After Combat.
Yep.
Jane, thanks for coming. And just tell me a little bit about your organisation. What do you do?
OK, well, thank you for having me here so we can talk about Care After Combat. So we are an organisation, a charity, who work into the prison system, working with military veterans who've somehow got involved with the justice system and...
So there's quite a high population of ex-servicemen and women in our prisons. Why is that, do you think?
So 2014, the government did a review of who was resident in UK prisons, and what they found were that military veterans are the highest occupational group, and this obviously raises some concerns. So the government wanted to do something about that, and so they supported Care After Combat initially, just as a scoping exercise, really, to see if there was any way we could help these men and women actually, you know, understand the problems that led to offending behaviour and go on to lead successful lives.
So what sort of offending behaviour are we talking typically for people that's in prison that's actually served in our armed forces?
Primarily, it's violence.
Yeah.
So that is the highest offence that we work with.
Okay.
But of course, the military, as with everybody else, it's the full range of offending behaviour.
OK, so we're in a pub, Jane, Dr. Jane, and I guess for some people, you know, the odd tip of alcohol is good, a bit of fun of a weekend, relax, let your hair down. But for some people, alcohol is not always their best friend, and I guess that plays a part in some of your veterans that end up inside.
Absolutely. So, speaking from my own experience, a good 2/3 of the people I work with have some kind of mental health problem or mental health difficulty, struggling to either adapt into civilian life or with some of the traumas they've experienced during service. People might self-medicate with alcohol to manage some of those thoughts and feelings.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show on GB News. Delighted to have your company this morning. Now I'm joined in the studio by Sir Simon Mayle, the former Deputy Chief of the Defence Staff. Lovely to see you this morning, Sir Simon. Thank you for joining me. Can we start with Joe Biden?
Yes, if we must.
I mean, this report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial, which begs the question, why is he then fit to stand as president for another term?
Well, I think a lot of Americans are asking that, and I wouldn't want to get involved in discussions about another nation's election. But, you know, the President of the United States, Commander-in-Chief of the most powerful force on earth, the backbone of NATO, it matters hugely to friends of America who's leading there.
I mean, are you convinced he's got all of his mental faculties? I mean, obviously, we've seen the gaffes, we've seen him physically trip up. He's getting very confused. Last week, he gives this press conference to justify that he's in the right mind and then confuses Mexico and Egypt, I think.
Well, it's not encouraging. I mean, you know, the reality is the depth of the institutional strength of America is huge.
Yes.
You know, CIA, FBI, the military, etc. So there's a vast bureaucracy that's supporting. But in the current crisis, I say global crisis with China, with Iran, with the Red Sea, with what's going on obviously in Gaza, with Russia, Ukraine, energy, etc., you do look occasionally to leaders to give you that sense of stability that I'm in charge, I know what's going on, I'm a senior person and I'm in control. And so it is worrying. And I think, you know, if you look at Tucker Carlson's interview with Putin. I hardly say Putin came over as...
What did you make of that, then? I mean, he's basically blaming the Poles for the invasion by Hitler. He's giving
a
this
narrative.
He's rewriting Russian history over the course of an hour and a half. It looked like Tucker Carlson was about to nod off at one point. I mean, is this man unhinged? How dangerous is he?
Well, he also, again, one does worry about the quality of leadership in Russia. There's a man who's put himself under huge pressure by the aggression against Ukraine. Clearly, he's not a well man. I don't think Tucker Carlson did any of us any favours. He allowed Putin to spout off this sort of mythology that is still very powerful in Russia about grievance and entitlement. And of course, what Putin got out of it was Carlson saying, being used as a stooge to say to the West, give up on Ukraine.
Yes.
Russia's not going to give up. Why are you wasting your time? And so you combine the two and you get a little unsettled.
But then we've talked about Biden. Is the prospect of a Trump presidency also worrying because of his approach to Putin? I mean, he's very closely aligned with Tucker Carlson. They're of the same sort of vein. The next thing we know, we could see the leader of the free world saying to Putin, we'll have half of Ukraine.
Well, he's quoted at a rally, I can't remember where it was, of telling the story about saying to a European leader who said, how dare you almost threaten the withdrawal of American support for NATO. And he quite rightly said, if you don't pay up, you're delinquent. And if you're delinquent, I will, and he's on record as saying the equivalent of, I will tell Putin to take whatever he wants, so you've got it coming to you.
Yeah.
Pay up. And of course, we've heard this message all the way back from Obama and probably earlier, that the Europeans are not pulling their weight in order to justify American taxpayers' support. Very fair, but you rather hope, wiser minds in America will say, actually, our security is vitally important to American security.
Very quick question on Zelensky and the sacking of this army chief, Valery Zelensky, or Zelensky. What does that tell us? I mean, is Ukraine losing the war? Is this looking worse for Zelensky, do you think?
I think it is. And Zelensky is very worried, Houthis, Red Sea, economy, weak economies in the West, Gaza, obviously the switching of American issues to Gaza and Israel, the whole clagging up in Congress about support for Ukraine. This is not a good time for him to be saying, I don't trust my senior military people.
No, it's a bad look.
And then going back
While
to
I've got you,
supporters.
I must just ask you finally about this recruitment crisis in the army. We've got a story on the front of the Telegraph today effectively saying that they want to relax security for overseas recruits because they're down on numbers. I mean, is this the result of the British Army making a mistake in outsourcing recruitment to firms rather than doing it in-house?
Yes, Cabinet have had a decade to get their house in order, and they've failed. It is taking far too long to get those who want to come. It is part of, I would say, argue a bigger issue to do with trying to get people to sign up for God, King and Country. At the same time, while there's a whole plethora of approaches trying to demonise Britain's history, role, and all the things.
You think wokery might be playing a part here because
I
people
think
are
it's a huge part. We are asking young men, fundamentally young men, from largely the British working class, to sign up for God, King and Country, to lay their lives on the line. And at the same time, they're being told that the country they're supposed to be supporting is colonial, imperial, full of... which, again, contrasts with how Putin is using mythology to give the Russians a sense of pride, which they don't deserve in this case, whereas we have every right to be hugely proud of our history and the young men and women who support our armed forces in defending it.
Interesting point, very interesting. Thank you very much indeed for joining me this morning, Sir Simon.
Thanks, Camilla.
Lovely to see you. Coming up next, I'm going to be joined by the Housing Secretary, Michael Gove. I'll be asking him why the government hasn't built enough homes and what he plans to do about it. Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I. So you want higher taxes? Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you. Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months. That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
Claire, you want to talk by cars growing by a couple of centimetres a year?
Yeah, well, 1 centimetre every 2 years.
Okay.
It's unrelenting because the people are
so fixated on the big SUVs. The sales have gone through the roof, and yet it's James Nix, the analyst for Transport and Environment Campaign, said the author of the report on the trend said, spurred on by sales of the largest SUVs, vehicles are getting wider every year. Now, what does that mean for us? Well, it means that our roads weren't...
Comfortable ride, beautiful engines, smooth. I mean, it's luxury, it's gorgeous.
Well, as I know, I used to have two, but I don't...
You used to have 2 SUVs?
Well, one SUV at a time, but I had 2 brands of them. But I'd no longer drive in London now because I just don't see the point, because of the ULEZ, because of the, you know, you can turn down a thing and get fined.
Parking spaces, whatever.
Yeah, the growth in car size also causes issues for their drivers. The report found that largely luxury SUVs, which are about 2 metres wide, no longer fit in off-street parking.
That's true.
They also leave too little space for passengers to get in and out of the vehicles in typical off-street spaces, and they're about 2.4 metres wide, the report found. And I'll tell you, I was stuck in a bus last night trying to get home, and the buses couldn't move because the streets were too crammed with all of these massive cars either side. Chelsea tractors. And it was gridlocked.
Yeah, but maybe they're not the problem, maybe the buses are the problem.
The buses take people to their place of work and get
I'd
them
like
home.
to know when, because when I go through London, all I see is empty buses.
Oh, you're lucky. Every time I'm on one, they're full.
Well, they're obviously only full at rush hour. You see, the thing is, property developers, when they do high-rise car parks, or, you know, they build a multiplex cinema and there's a car park attached to it, that's not my fault that I can't fit into their space. It's their fault. So
well, it's all driven by money, isn't it? The more spaces that they have, the more people they can get.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. We're just waiting for Michael Gove to be mic'd up, as we say in the trade. I'm going to bring Simon Mail back into the conversation. Really, really briefly, Simon, are you confident that the government is doing enough when it comes to defence spending? You know, we're at 2.25. It should be 3% of GDP, shouldn't it?
Everything that's going on in the world tells you that a responsible government, a responsible nation, should be spending more on defence, and Britain should certainly be spending more. And that includes, on the existing army we've got, and increasing the size of the 3 services.
We'll be keeping an eye on the March budget. I'm hoping that Levelling Up Secretary Michael Gove, the Tory MP for Surrey Heath, can hear me. Mr Gove, lovely to see you this morning.
Hi, Camilla, good morning.
Hello, good morning. How much of a role do you think immigration has played in the lack of housing available to younger people? I know that this is a big bugbear of yours. You're talking about the fact that not enough young adults can get on the home ownership ladder. There's an interesting graph, actually, in the FT talking about how home ownership, particularly among young adults, has completely tanked since 2005. But surely the government must admit that these high levels of immigration have had an enormous impact.
Yes, that's right. And earlier this week, I was talking to a House of Lords committee about it, and I made the point that we are currently seeking to deliver 300,000 homes a year. We've delivered 2.5 million since 2010, but obviously with new people arriving, that puts pressure on housing stock. So that's why it's so important that we get a handle on both legal and illegal migration as well. Yeah, absolutely.
But then you say it's important to get a handle on it. I mean, obviously, this migration figure has gone up exponentially on the Tories' watch. Equally, you haven't built enough homes. So it's your fault, really.
Well, I don't run away from responsibility, yeah. So if you want to look at migration figures, I think that a significant increase has come about as a result of folk coming from Ukraine and Hong Kong who are fleeing persecution, whom we want to welcome. But it is also the case that we've had, whether it's through the student route or other routes, people exploiting the system in a way that requires tightening of the rules, and those rules have now been tightened. And you know, as a way of dealing with the migration issue, there's a contrast between the government, who have a plan, Labour, who've got no plan and would have an open borders policy. Then on housing itself, we've secured, we've helped deliver 2.5 million new homes since 2010.
I know,
So,
but you've still
again,
missed the
I think the first thing we
300,000
need to do
target, haven't you? I mean, you keep on missing this 300,000 target. I'd look at the figures, and I think many people listening and watching to this will look at the figures and actually say 300,000, which you keep on missing, isn't high enough. Should probably be 500,000 homes a year, shouldn't it?
Well, there's a debate about whether or not 300,000 is enough. All I would say is two things briefly. The first is that since in the last 3 decades, the 4 years where we've delivered the most homes have been since 2019. So the longer the Conservatives have been in, the more homes that we've delivered, in essence. The second thing is that good enough? No, it's not yet good enough. But I think any judgment has to be a judgment in the round. And I think the judgment I would make is measured success so far, but a need for even greater ambition. And we have that ambition because we have a plan, Labour don't.
OK. Should you go back to the pledge that David Cameron made when you were a minister under his administration of migration being in the tens of thousands?
Well, I think we should definitely bring it down, but I wouldn't. Well, again, the Prime Minister, the Home Secretary have already made it clear that we want to reduce legal and illegal migration. But I wouldn't put a figure on it now because I think it's important that it's the Prime Minister and the Home Secretary that decree that.
But this housing crisis, I mean, forgive me if you feel this is too personal, but this is affecting you, surely, because I read in the Telegraph in the week you're staying at David Cameron, the Foreign Secretary's Grace and Favour home in London. So are you struggling to get on the housing ladder in London?
There are security reasons behind that I won't go into now.
All right, OK, but you can appreciate the problem.
Oh, yeah, gosh. And I've got 2 children who are 20 and 19. They're both students, but I see every day the challenges that they face as a result of rental costs in Manchester and in Cardiff. So absolutely. But even if I wasn't directly personally affected, anyone in my job looking at the situation that we face would want to help. And again, one of the things that I would say is that there's been a determined effort on our part to look at every way in which we can increase new homes. Last year, we introduced legislation to try to unlock housing where it's been blocked by environmental red tape. It would have unlocked 100,000 new homes, but Labour voted against it.
I know, but you have had Tories in your own party being very NIMBY. You know, you had Theresa Villiers and others saying that they wanted you to scrap the 300,000 target. So the Tories haven't really got their powder dry when it comes to arguments about whether you should build more housing. You've got Simon Clarke on one side and Theresa Villiers on another.
I think with respect to the 300,000 target, I don't think there's anyone who's in the Conservative Party who's argued that that's wrong. There will always be individual MPs with constituency interests that will want to make sure that new housing is delivered sensitively. And whether they're Labour or Conservative, that is totally legitimate. But there's a difference between a party saying that its policy is pro-builder, not blocker. And then when we bring things forward, every single Conservative MP, every single Conservative I know, backed our proposals for new homes, and Labour were whipped to a man and woman against it. So this is not about individuals. This is about a party that makes big claims, and yet, as we see time after time, it turns turtle. And that's why Keir Starmer is the jellyfish of British politics. He's transparent, spineless, swept along by the tide.
All right, we've heard the jellyfish line before. Let's talk about an individual you know very, very well, Boris Johnson. There's calls in this morning's papers to bring back Boris. What do you say to that, Michael Gove?
I think every Conservative should be, as part of the big Conservative family, doing all we can in order to make sure that Rishi is re-elected as Prime Minister. I think Boris has got enormous gifts, and I would hope that Boris would play a role along with every Conservative in the electoral fight ahead. But Boris, it's up to him. He's already done great service to this country, and that has to be respected as well.
Well, he said he wants the Prime Minister to give him a call. So Rishi Sunak should pick up the phone this week, shouldn't he?
Well, maybe they should even go for a drink together. I don't know, but whatever.
Have you been for a drink with Boris Johnson lately, Mr. Gove?
Not in the last 2 weeks, no.
In the last 2 years?
Yes.
Have you?
But
are you back on good terms with Mr. Johnson?
Well, again, when my friend Kemi Badenoch was on this programme, I think the other day, she made the point that people are not interested in tittle-tattle about politics. The soap opera is sometimes of interest to some, but the main thing that people are interested in are politicians doing their job effectively? Are they delivering? And I think the Prime Minister is delivering in helping to reduce taxes, helping to lower inflation.
OK, we don't need a party political broadcast, Mr Gove. Thank you. You mentioned Kemi Badenoch there, and by the way, I'm honoured that you watch this show and that you tune in and you saw her great performance in the seat next to me. I am intrigued, though.
I'm a regular GBNews viewer.
You're very kind, thank you. Michael Gove did something that was very, very annoying, she told The Times this week. What did you do that was very, very annoying?
Well, again, there are a number of things that occur in politics where, as an individual, as you put forward your policy proposals, you don't always necessarily put them forward in a way that carries everyone with you. But the important thing I would stress is...
Which policy proposal did she not like from you?
The important thing is that away from the soap opera, Kemi is doing an amazing job. She has secured membership of the world's biggest free trade...
Why aren't you telling us what's happened? Answer the question, Mr Gove. Why did you annoy her? Come on, fess up. What happened?
Camilla, I annoy all sorts of people all of the time. If I ran through all of the ways in which I'm annoying, then I'd be on here until the end of Nigel Farage's show on Thursday. So my list of irritating qualities is there for all to see. But the one thing that I am keen on is making sure that all of us as Conservatives recognise that when you've got a really talented minister like Kemi, who is delivering for people in Port Talbot by supporting the steel sector, delivering for people in Sunderland by backing Nissan's expansion, securing our membership of a new trade bloc, and also making sure that on key issues like protecting women's spaces and protecting children, that the equality legislation is fit for purpose. She is doing a bang-up job, and she is one of the number of Conservatives in our cabinet who, like Laura Chalk, Claire Coutinho, Richard Holden, and Mr. Gove, who are brilliant next-generation leaders.
Very, very quickly, I was going to ask you for your view on Park Run, because I know you're a runner. Should they have scrapped all the records, yes or no? You've seen this story, no doubt. They've scrapped the records because they want transgender people to be included in the records, and women have said that's an outrage. Remember the Park Run people that run those events through parks across the UK? Should they have scrapped women's records, yes or no, do you think, Mr Gove?
I don't know this story, but the one thing... But the one thing that I would say is it is absolutely vitally important that women's sport remains an arena where women and girls can compete and can feel safe, whether that's in the changing room or on the sports field. I talked to a couple of sporting bodies about the importance of that.
Mr Gove, it's been a delight to speak to you this morning. Thank you very much for your time, and thank you for tuning into GB News. I no doubt you'll be watching the People's Forum with the Prime Minister tomorrow.
Yeah, I will, and good luck with the show, Camilla. It's been a big success since you took over.
Thank you very much. Take care. Thank you. Well, there you have it. Ministers do watch this show and enjoy it. We're going to be hearing from what the People's Panel have to say in just a moment. Don't go anywhere.
Hi, Rishi here. As Prime Minister, I'm focused on delivering on your priorities. So I'll be on the road to join GB News for a special People's Forum on Monday the 12th of February, where I'll be taking questions from a live audience about the issues that really matter to you: the economy, immigration, the NHS. See you there.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Patrick Christie's Tonight. Weekdays from 9 p.m.
Mike Freer joins me now. Mike, thank you very much for coming into the studio.
Thank you for inviting me.
Firstly, how are you?
It's been a busy day, and it's been quite a traumatic experience. It's a real wrench to walk away from a job that you love, but also a constituency that you've become, you know, I live there, it's my home, and I regard many of my constituents as friends, and it is an amazing place, and to walk away from that is really quite, it's quite an emotional wrench to think this was a job I loved, but unfortunately I can't do it anymore.
Can you talk me through the process? Because you mentioned about the alleged arson attack, etc., being the final straw, but this has been a really quite vile journey to get to this point. So what kind of threats have you had? What's that look like?
Well, like every MP, I mean, you day in, day out, you get abusive emails, you get low-level stuff that, whether we should accept it, but we do, it's graffiti, you know, it's things like, you know, in the past I've had a mock Molotov cocktail left on the office door, meaning we had to evacuate the whole building. I've come out of my house and found a note on my car. Where I live is common knowledge, but what I drive is less so. And it's a few weeks after John Mann had the wheel nuts on his car tampered with. So that all kind of makes you get a bit, you know, what on earth's going on. But I've had 2 run-ins with the organisation that was Muslims Against Crusades, and people like Anjem Chowdhury, who was behind that organisation, been to prison. But online it said, I used to do surgery in mosques, so I wanted to go out and see people. And online, it's a picture of me saying, you're not welcome in our mosque, let Stephen Timms be a pointed reminder. So it's not very subtle.
Well, just for our viewers and listeners who might not remember that,
Stephen Timms, of course, was stabbed by a woman who'd been radicalised. Thank heavens he survived. So it was a very unsubtle.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show on GB News. Don't forget, very shortly I'm going to be joined by the former Press Secretary to Queen Elizabeth II, Elsa Anderson. What does the King's cancer diagnosis mean for the slimmed-down monarchy, but particularly for William and Kate? But first, let's cross back to Sophie, who's with our People's panel in Manchester. Sophie, what did the People's panellists make of my interviews?
Well, first, we're back in Manchester. We're going to quickly speak to a member of management here. Now, a real issue in Manchester at the moment is hospitality, the increase in rent, bills, all that kind of thing, and hospitality is really struggling. However, Fress, it may not be that kind of case. Connor, good morning to you. Tell me what the situation is like here in Fress.
Hiya. To be honest, at Fress, we're doing quite well, especially over the last couple of months. Our business has grown quite exponentially, to be honest with you. And we've just got a good group of young people working here from mid to late 20s, just kind of making their way in the world, kind of hoping to bring a bit of business to Manchester. It's going quite well for us at the moment.
Fabulous. Thank you very much, Connor. So there you go, a little bit of a silver lining. We will now rejoin our People's panel so that we can gauge their views on your interviewees this morning. Good morning to you once again, my lovely People's panel. I'm going to come to yourself first. I know that you had a question this morning for Labour's Pat McFadden. What did you make of his interview?
So Pat McFadden confirmed that they are ditching their commitment to the £28 billion investment in carbon-free infrastructure. But he also confirmed that they're keeping their commitment to make our electricity supply carbon-free by 2030. To me, those things aren't compatible with each other. If you don't invest, you can't make that commitment. They do have a commitment to nuclear, which I welcome, but you can't turn nuclear on and off when the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow. So it feels to me that they're taking away things that might make things better, but keeping things that are going to make things worse for ordinary people. If they're not investing in power, it's ordinary bill payers who are going to have to pay the bill.
There we have some reaction from that interview with Labour. Now we're going to get some reaction to Kwasi Kwarteng's interview. Sayan, I know you were very interested in what he had to say. What did you make of his interview with Camilla this morning?
I think Mr Kwarteng has said he's stepping down, and as he skips off to the horizon with his big fat MP's pension, perfectly able to pay his mortgage, he leaves in his wake tens of thousands of self-employed people who are struggling to pay their mortgages because of the huge increases. We're back up at 5%. There's a lot of self-employed people in this country who couldn't get the mortgage that they've got if they tried to fulfil the criteria that now exists, and it's just plain wrong. It's shocking. He's leaving families who are struggling whilst he flits off.
There we go. Not impressed with Mr Kwarteng. And Matt, just a quick thought from yourself on Mr Gove's interview. What did you make of that?
Well, I'm not 100% convinced of what Mr Gove had to say about the housing crisis. The ONS has predicted that we're going to get 6.6 million more people within the next 12 years. I think that the Tories need to do a lot more to convince people like me who've decided to vote for reform. They need to convince me and what they're going to do in the future to get my vote.
Very, very interesting their reaction from our lovely People's Panel here in Manchester this morning.
Thank you so much for that, Sophie. Great job in Manchester. Now, joining me now is the leader of Reform and GB News host Richard Tice. He's standing in for Michael Portillo. Richard, what's coming up on your show today?
Good morning, Camilla. Yes, we've got an action-packed show. I'm going to be looking into errors and mistakes in the child maintenance service. We've got Stanley Johnson introducing his new book in the studio. That will not want to be missed, that is absolutely for sure. And also, we are going to be having the huge row about blue cards, yellow cards in football, Camilla. And finally, yes, it was National Pizza Day a couple of days ago. We're going to be making pizzas here in the studio.
You lucky things. That's going to be making me very, very hungry. We don't have pizza in here. Have a good show, Richard. That's stay tuned for Richard Tice, who's on at 11. Now, in just a minute, I'm going to be speaking to former Press Secretary to Queen Elizabeth II, Elsa Anderson, on all royal matters. But first, here's the weather.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, good morning to you. I'm Jonathan Vaughtry here with your GB News weather forecast provided by the Met Office. It is a relatively bleak start to Sunday for many of us, all courtesy of low pressure, bringing reasonably unsettled conditions. These occluded fronts that are swirling around this, bringing areas of showers and longer bands of rain, particularly across eastern areas of England first thing this morning, spreading its way into parts of north-eastern Scotland. A very wet day here. Some of the fog, mist and smoke that we have around will eventually clear its way off into the afternoon, and we'll start to see some brighter spells developing, but still with a scattering of showers pushing their way in from the west, so can't rule out the brolly will be needed later on. Temperatures generally around 7 to 11 degrees Celsius, which is pretty much where we'd expect them to be for this time of the year. As that band of rain continues to push its way northwards across the Northern Isles, we open up the stream to that westerly flow of air. So showers continuing to push their way in, particularly for areas of Scotland. Northern Ireland could turn wintry with some snow over the higher ground areas, but there's also a decent amount of clear spells developing overnight, and with that, it means it will be a chillier night to come, low single figures for many of us. But with those clear spells, there'll also be a decent amount of sunshine to kick off Monday morning as well, particularly if you are further towards the east, generally staying drier with some fair weather cloud into the afternoon. The showers will always be most frequent and heaviest further towards the north and west, again wintry over the hills into the daytime. A slightly fresher feeling day, temperatures around 6 to 10 degrees Celsius. Do enjoy the sunnier spells when you get them, because things will remain fairly changeable with further rain on the cards throughout the rest of the week. Bye-bye.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. I forgot to say earlier, by the way, if you want to sign up for the People's Panel, it's peoplespanel@gbnews.uk. Please do. Earlier on, we referenced Rochdale Labour by-election candidate Azhar Ali, and here are the other listed candidates for the upcoming election. Azhar Ali, as we've stated, Mark Coleman, Independent, Simon Danczuk, who's for Reform UK, Ian Donaldson, who's the Lib Dem candidate, Paul Ellison, who's the Conservative, George Galloway, remember him, Workers' Party of Britain, Michael Howarth, who's an Independent, William Howarth, who's an Independent, Guy Otten, who's a Green Party candidate, Ravin Rodent Subalterner, who's an official monster raving loony candidate, there's always one, and David Tully, who's also an Independent. Now we've rattled through that list, let's welcome into the studio former Press Secretary to Queen Elizabeth II, Elsa Anderson. Lovely to see you this morning, Elsa. It's been a pretty momentous week, hasn't it, in royaldom. The King's cancer diagnosis, lots of questions in the morning papers today. Sunday Times headline was sort of the fragile crown. Do you think the monarchy's looking more fragile in light of what we've heard?
I think there are always sort of, potholes in the road with the institution. I don't think it's any less fragile than it has been before. So, no, I wouldn't really agree with that assessment. I think, it's a bump in the road, an awful bump, obviously, but a bump nonetheless.
And we've had a lot of talk, haven't we, about whether the Prince of Wales, Prince William, should step up to the plate. He seems to be in a bit of a dilemma because on one hand, he's looking after his wife, Kate. She's undergone her own abdominal surgery. Palace hasn't given many details about what exactly has happened there, but she's recuperating. We're not expecting her back in business until after Easter. You've got, obviously, the King now out of his public-facing role, Prince William supporting the Princess of Wales. This whole slimmed-down monarchy, I mean, it does look a little bit like there are too few royals to go around.
Well, I think other members of the royal family are stepping up. We've got the Princess Royal out and about as ever, the hardest working member of the royal family.
The royal trooper.
Absolutely. We've got the Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh out and about. Also, the elderly royals are still fulfilling their own engagements. So, yes, it is a slimmed-down monarchy, but I think people will undertake their own engagements, but they will also, fulfil the role while others are not present at the moment.
Also, do you think we're perhaps not giving enough credit this week? There's been lots of talk about the King and indeed William, but how about the Queen in all this, Queen Camilla? I mean, she's 76 years old.
I know.
And it's, well, she'll be there, she'll be public-facing. I mean, people forget that she is a grandmother herself.
She is, and also, she hasn't been brought up to do this role. With the King, with Prince William, I mean, they know their destiny, where she's relatively a newcomer to the royal family. And I think she's doing an absolutely tremendous job. As you said, she is a grandmother, but she has... she's got to support her husband. She's a wife as well. And I'm sure everyone has been touched with someone who's had cancer. And it's actually... it's hard for the spouse or the family as well to undertake that role, to actually, have to deal...
It's the trouble with a family firm, though, isn't it? It's like, there's the family aspect of it, there's the firm aspect of it. Let's just talk about Prince Harry being back in the country for another whistle-stop tour. I mean, some people looked at that 30-minute meeting at Clarence House. They're there, they meet for 30 minutes. The next thing he knows, the King and the Queen fly up to Sandringham. That's it.
But all I would say was, if the King did have treatment that morning... he's probably not feeling his best.
No.
He could be nauseous, he could be absolutely tired. Maybe you don't want to sit around with whoever it is because you're feeling absolutely ghastly.
Is there any scope at all for a Duke and Duchess of Sussex return to the monarchy, do you think, Elsa? I mean, I know that sounds absolutely inconceivable, but it is being discussed. The idea that actually the monarchy's looking slimmer without Harry and Meghan. Would you like to see them back?
Put me on the spot, why don't you?
Yeah, sorry.
I think there is
carefully about the response to this.
I think I'm a firm believer in reconciliation in families.
But that ship might have sailed.
Who knows? Who knows? If I had a crystal ball, I would make a lot of money.
No. But I mean, I suppose kind of like this idea of there not being reconciliation. You would have thought, wouldn't you, that a King's cancer diagnosis, the cancer diagnosis of the only parent you have left, not least after the tragedy that was their mother's death, would be enough to bring those royal brothers together.
Again, I don't have a crystal ball, but what I would say is he did, as soon as he heard about the cancer diagnosis, he got on an aeroplane and he came over to see his father.
Yes, which was the right thing to do, do you think?
Totally. I do think it is, absolutely, absolutely.
What about talk of bringing back, or bringing in, actually, because they've never really been working royals, Princess Beatrice and Eugenie? I know you worked with them when you were in the palace. I mean, they're nice ladies.
They're lovely, absolutely lovely, charming, very, very loyal to their parents and the institution. I haven't heard those rumours about bringing them back.
Well, just this idea that because Beatrice is a councillor of state and the palace have said they don't need to appoint councillors because at the moment the King's going to carry on with his red boxes and behind the scenes he's going to be doing all of the constitutional work, and if he doesn't, the Prince of Wales is there to kind of bridge the gap. But because the councillors of state are taken from the most senior royals in the line of succession, Beatrice is still one of those royals. And therefore, I suppose it begs the question, you talked earlier about older royals, kind of like, keeping the end up, so to speak.
Absolutely.
And naturally, they're younger and they're nice women and they may be perhaps quite relatable to the public. We appreciate the problems associated with the Duke of York, but why not bring them into the fray and have them maybe carrying out some charitable engagements? Or
Well, I think they already do carry out charitable engagements on their own. I know both of them have got their own charities and organisations which they support and they're patrons of. So they're already doing that. I don't think they need to be working members of the royal family with that title to carry on doing what they're doing at the moment.
Although, isn't there a bit of a shift between what William and Kate and their approach to royal life is and what it used to be. You've mentioned the royal trooper herself, the Princess Royal, Princess Anne. She carried out 550-odd engagements last year. That's, I think, more than her brother, the King, because she likes to cram engagements into a day. She'll work from dawn till dusk. If she comes back in the evening, she'll do a couple more engagements for dinner.
She's a power horse. She really is.
She's a power horse. So it's all about, you know, being there, visibility, kind of, you know, the so-called tree plantings and plaque unveilings. Comparatively, William and Kate want to do this more thematic royalty. So they want to be doing sort of initiatives about mental health, initiatives about early years, initiatives about the environment or homelessness, but they're not doing as many day-to-day jobs. And I wonder whether that's a problem in terms of visibility.
Is it a problem, though? I would say there is room for every way how you want to do a royal engagement. There is room for doing that 3, 4, 5, 6 engagements in a day, and there's room for the theme. So why not have both? I think it actually complements each other rather than pulls it apart.
I mean, there had been a criticism in the past that William and Kate just weren't doing enough. I mean, comparatively, when you look at the league tables, and maybe these league tables are a bad thing, I don't know what the royals think of them, you know, clocking it up.
But when you say they're not doing enough, we don't know what they're doing behind the scenes.
Yeah.
There are meetings, there are paperwork, there's planning, and also they've got 3 small children. So I would say to the critics, I would just say, you know, give them a break.
Yeah, that's a really good point. What I think has been interesting in the last week is the kind of modernity of it all. I mean, who would have thought that the words enlarged prostate would appear on a Buckingham Palace bulletin?
Absolutely.
Then who would have thought that the word cancer would appear on one? We then get this briefing that actually, well, Prince William will help his father, but his immediate concern is his wife.
Yeah.
That's a step change from years gone by, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And do you think it's a good thing?
I do. I think it absolutely shows that he is a modern monarch in waiting, where family and duty go, you know, hand in hand, really.
I mean, you had quite a few interactions, of course, with the late Queen, but the King now, but also with Prince William. What kind of approach do you think he takes to royal life? Because we know he's a more serious figure than his younger brother.
Well, because he's, you know, he's the next in line to the throne. He's got to be.
But how aware do you think he is of the sort of royal branding? Because we always thought when the Queen was alive, he was in a bit of a difficult position because he and Kate sort of had the sprinkling of stardust, a little bit like the Diana effect, Diana's son, and this glamorous wife that he has. He doesn't want to overshadow the King. He didn't want to overshadow the Queen either. How did he sort of play, when you were working in the palace, how did he operate? What was your impression of him as a young man?
Well, just going back to your original point about the stardust, of course, when the Queen became Queen, she was 26 years old. So she had that stardust. She was that glamorous, young, you know, fragile, beautiful Queen.
Yes.
So actually, that happened to her as well. I think Prince William he's very much his own man, very much his own man, and he will step up in the way he wants to do it.
And do it perhaps a bit differently from what's gone before.
And there's no real rule book.
Yeah, well, that's interesting, because I suppose we think that we have to keep on the traditions of monarchy and that continuity is everything, and sometimes there's been an impetus behind palace gates to say, well, what did we do last time? Let's do it again. But do you actually think that it's better for William to break free a bit?
Well, sometimes you don't have to reinvent the wheel.
Yes.
And, you know, I remember coming into the palace in 2001 with all these, you know, ideas, and I would put a note up to the Queen, and you get a note down saying, well, actually, we did that 20 years ago. And I thought, you know...
We tried that and it didn't quite
exactly.
work. And let's talk about the Princess of Wales, finally. I mean, obviously, she's had this operation. We don't quite know what's happened. We obviously wish her our very best because she's recuperating now at their home in Windsor. She's a young woman. She's only 42. She's got, as you say, these 3 young children. Yet I feel the weight of expectation on her slender shoulders. I mean, she's under quite a lot of pressure, isn't she?
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think Prince William will try and shield her from as much of that pressure as possible. And I hear they've gone to Sandringham for half-term week next week, to recuperate. And I think he will try and give her as much space as she needs to recuperate.
And do you think the palace is better now than it was back in Diana's day? She felt like she was thrown in at the deep end. I appreciate that Kate's been around for a long, long time. But when it comes to support, because of the pressure from the media, the pressure from the public, it's great that people say she's never put a foot wrong, but then that would make you worried to be putting a foot wrong, wouldn't it?
Yeah. I wasn't around during the Diana era, so I can't really say much about that. All I know is that, well, certainly when I was at the palace, the Princess of Wales was offered as much support and help and assistance as she wanted. I think members of the royal family wanted to offer her that help as well.
They want her to do well.
Absolutely, and she's got, she's got the love of her own family as well, supporting her, and I'm sure they're with her, looking after her, making sure she doesn't, do too much too soon and actually has the time to recuperate.
Elsa Anderson, thank you so much for joining me this morning. I'm going to be back next week at 9:30. Up next, it's Richard Tice. Don't forget, if you missed any of the show today, you can catch up the highlights at 6 p.m. here on GB News. It's the People's Forum with Rishi Sunak tomorrow. Tune in from 8 p.m. and enjoy the rest of your Sunday.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Martin Daubney, weekdays from 3 p.m.
You have a president in President Biden who's not enforcing the law that was passed by Congress. President Obama, criticize him or not, actually enforced the law and was deporting people that had crossed illegally. Of course, President Trump enforced the law and improved the law to make sure that, and worked with Mexico to have the Remain in Mexico policy. Biden has abandoned federal policy. In fact, he's deliberately trying to let in as many immigrants as possible. More for the Democrats, more is better and less is racist.
Just astonishing. And the statement that Greg Abbott put out is really feisty stuff. He said the federal government has broken the contract between the United States and the state of Texas. And the eye numbers, Greg, are simply eye-watering. 6 million illegal immigrants have crossed our southern border in just 3 years, Governor Abbott says. That's more than the population of 33 states in the United States. Astonishing numbers.
And Martin, that's just Texas. If you add Arizona and other border states, it's pushing 10 million. By the end of Biden's term, it'll be 11 million. A study by Yale University a few weeks ago, 3 very liberal professors that did the study estimate there's 22 million illegal aliens. So this is a crisis that was created by Biden. It's what he wants. They want unfettered access to the border. They're letting them in. It's a real hardship on the working people of Texas and other border states. And now it's a real hardship on cities that the federal government, as well as the governors of Texas and other states, are sending some of the migrants to those so-called sanctuary cities.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
And a very good morning and welcome to Sunday with me, Richard Tice. Yes, I'm standing in for Michael Portillo. He is away this week. Now, joining me over the next 2 fun-filled, action-packed hours, we're looking at the latest in politics, art, culture, and, of course, world affairs. Firstly, I'm going to be digging in once again to the Child Maintenance Service issues. My concerns about mistake, about errors, potentially the sort of scandal we might have heard about recently. Also, we got Stanley Johnson, yes, the father of the former Prime Minister. He's here in the studio discussing the 700th anniversary of the death of Marco Polo and a new book he is writing. Also, yellow cards, blue cards, football sin bins. We've got to hear from a former player and a referee as to what